Professor K here, back with the Your Favorite Recipe assignment. Now in this portion of the assignment, what we're going to do is replace some of those keywords that we've been adding while we rough out our styles with the real colors. And the reason why we did this using just the color keywords is because it's a lot easier to find and replace the colors in here all at once using these keywords that help us remember what the colors are. So before we do that, just a couple quick things I learned since the last video. The first one is, remember how I was having a lot of trouble with this nth child recipe and selecting the right children down here? Well, what I found out after I stopped recording the video and I did a little Googling is that you can actually select these in groups. So my group is of 3 items, and then you shift the styling for each item by 1, 2, or 3. This works is because it really kind of looks at things in groups. And so in computing, in programming, everything starts at 0 and you count up from there. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So at group 0, you get 3 times 0 plus 1, which is 1, the first child. 3 times 0 plus 2, which is 2, second. 3 times 0 plus 3, third child. And this goes on and on with each group of 3. And that's why this rule works. So I was actually able to condense this into 3 nth child rules, which I was super excited about. Now, in order to cite that properly, what I did was I just took the URL from the Stack Overflow question that gave me the idea over here, and I put it right into my CSS in a comment, and I just explained how it works. And you can do the same thing in your own CSS whenever you have to borrow something, or when someone explains to you how to fix a problem. And as you can see, it wasn't a super long solution or an explanation. It was just long enough to help someone who comes to my code understand what I'm doing. The other thing that I did was I added a couple of really light text shadows on each of the H1s and H2s. And you can actually get the exact values for these right from Adobe XD. Over under shadow, there's an X value, and mine actually says 4 and 4 for the X and Y values, plus a blur value of 0, and then the color is always the last one. So here, I'm going to just change this to 4 pixels, 4 pixels, leave it at yellow. I'm going to add the 0 just so that you can see that this is exactly the same as XD. So this is a blur value of 0, but let's make this black for a second so you can see it. So here's my my shadow, and if I add a 10 pixel blur value, see how it gets more like a shadow? That's how you make it blurry. But we're just going to back that up and go back to yellow. All right, so now that we know that, the next part that we're going to do here is we're going to just start taking these keywords and we're going to replace them with the real color value that we want. So let's start with red. In most code editors, what you can do to select multiple items, kind of like a find and replace all at the same time, is Command D. And I'm actually going to show you these keystrokes and some of my keyboard shortcuts in this video. Watch in the bottom right corner. Here you can see the control as a demo, and it will show you the exact key presses I'm doing. So let's try this out. Red, Command D, Command D, Command D. In blue, it'll show you why it's highlighting. Now this wasn't specific enough. Notice how it's picking up the RED in ingredients. So let's click to deselect and select something a little bit more specific. I only want red when it's part of a CSS value. So that means I always want the semicolon after it. And that should keep me from accidentally selecting classes. Let's try it out. Command D, 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 and you can just do this a bunch of times until you see the scroll bar kind of repeat going up. So now we have all of these selected, and if you arrow right or left, you can see that there's multiple cursors where the red was throughout the whole thing. So I'm going to just delete the red value, hop over back to XD, and from my color palette, grab this red, double click in here, making sure I have hex selected. If you have RGB in here, I want hex because I'm not doing anything with transparency, and that's a lot easier to copy and paste into my code. So here, let's just paste it in. And now we can see that the red has updated everywhere that we're using it. Let's do the same with yellow. Again, we're going to select including this last little semicolon, Command D a bunch of times. It only happens to be there once. From here, we'll grab the yellow, quick copy and paste into our stuff, and paste here. Real simple. Black, we'll do the same thing. There's only one. Pop over here, grab our black value, pop back here, paste. Easy peasy. And what, we've got blue as well that we haven't done yet. So I think this is the one that's used the most in here. Yeah, this one's used a lot. So let's just make sure, yep, that's got them all. Hop over, copy and paste. And in here, what I'm doing is I'm doing Shift, Option, and then left arrow in order to select the entire value. So you can see all that blue is selected, and so are all the blues down here. And then just paste that in. So that's a nice little shortcut. The final color that we have here that doesn't really have a color assigned to it in the palette is white. And just for consistency, I'm going to update this one to its proper hex value too, because I don't want these kind of like little spare color keywords in here. It's not very professional. It's more professional to use the hex value in case you have to edit it later. So the shorthand for this hex value, it's FFF, FFF. However, since it's all the same first three, you can just shorten it to FFF, and that's a lot easier. I like to write mine lowercase too. Oh, you know what? We forgot orange. Let's do orange real quick. That looks like the only one. Copy from here, and then paste into here. And there we have it. Now we have all of our colors looking just perfect and just the way that we want in here. So the reason why we do this way is because we actually don't have variables. We don't have a way to say white should look like this color or black should look like this color in CSS, at least not in a cross-browser compatible way. So what do I mean by that? Well, if we go to caniuse.com, and if we happen to know that there is such a thing as CSS variables, and we type this in, CSS variables, Caniuse is going to show us what the browser support is for that in all major browsers. In this class, we are coding for the latest version of all major browsers. And I'm mostly concerned with those within IE, Edge, Firefox, Chrome, and Safari, as well as iOS Safari and Android mobile, or Chrome for Android. Those are all really important to me because those are the major browsers used within BU. We can see here that IE11 doesn't support this. So even though CSS variables exist, they're not ready for prime time yet. So we're not going to touch them in this class. But you should be aware that CSS is always changing and developing, and you can use new features like this as long as you're willing to let some of your audience go. The trouble with using CSS variables is that because of if these colors, if the browser doesn't recognize them, what would happen is this color wouldn't show up at all. So one big danger of saying, well, we don't care about IE11, so it's not a big deal, is you really have to evaluate whether or not you're going to drop support for a certain browser by saying, okay, well, what would happen if I didn't have access to this color, this style? What would happen? Would it be okay if I used a variable for this and it just like didn't happen? So let's try taking out the background color. And now we can see this becomes a readability issue. It's really hard to see. So if a browser couldn't figure out what that background color was, we'd have an accessibility issue. And that's why we can't just say, I don't care about IE11. Even for those 1% of people, it's really our responsibility to make sure that the content is at least accessible. So for things like text shadow, we probably don't care. That's called progressive enhancement. We can let it go. We don't have to worry about providing a fallback for those. But for things like background color, that's really important. And in that case, we wouldn't want to depend on CSS variables for that. So that's a brief overview of how everything's going to work together with colors here. Even with these hex colors, if you need to change them later, you can do the same thing as you've been doing here. Just select them and just do Command D and get them all selected, and you can modify them just like that. But we don't have to do that here. We're happy with the colors, so that's just fine. So next up, we're going to be taking a look at how to add the proper typography to this and really get this looking the way that it should. I'll see you in just a moment.